Soon after the Parkland school shooting on Valentine's Day, Brevard County Sheriff Wayne Ivey proposed a plan to arm some school employees. The school board is expected to vote on Ivey's controversial STOMP program in May, and the plan has divided parents and staff. I'm Isadora and this is I Am Brevard. This week I sat down with Florida Today education reporter Caroline Glenn. We discussed the details of Ivey's plan and what school board members have said about it. Thank you, Caroline, for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So walk us back. Let's start with about 2 weeks after the Valentine's Day shooting in Parkland. Sheriff Ivey comes out with his plan to arm certain school personnel. Tell us what happened at that press conference.
So he presented his plan, and it had a lot of elements to it. There was talk about continuing to upgrade the school buildings, hiring more school resource officers, more active shooter drills, training, but the main component obviously was he introduced this STOMP program, as it's been called. It stands for Sheriff Trained On-Site Marshal Program, and it would arm certain school employees. Through his specific program, this is a little bit different from what the state has laid out. Employees who volunteer for the program would go through 176 hours of training over the summer. They would have to go through, firearms training, first aid, tactical defensive training, mental health training, diversity training, all this stuff. And they, if they make it through the training, they also have to pass psychological screenings, background checks, lots of things like that. They would be a deputy under the Brevard County Sheriff's Office and be allowed to carry a firearm to work at school.
Would parents know if their school has a marshal or a guardian?
It doesn't seem like it. Because basically the new law that's been put in place, a school by the upcoming school year either has to have a school resource officer, that's what most people are used to now, or this type of marshal in place. But parents, because the marshal's identities would have to be anonymous, parents likely wouldn't know, if there's, I guess they could find out, does my school have an SRO? That's public information, and if their school doesn't have an SRO, there's a chance that they could have an armed marshal. But as you've seen, it's been a very divisive, polarizing debate whether or not this is a good idea.
And we'll dig more into the details of the program, but let's go back to when Sheriff Ivey first came out with this plan. Superintendent Desmond Blackburn stood on stage with him and sent a message that perhaps the district is on board with the plan, but that really wasn't the case, right? So tell us, where everyone stands right now.
Yeah, so it was a little interesting, the press conference. Dr. Blackburn was standing next to Ivey and helped him present the plan. All of the school board members stood behind them, which you could say, gave the perception that it was a program that everyone already agreed to. The school board insists they have not made a decision whether or not to adopt this Marshall program yet. They discussed it for the first time at a school board meeting a few weeks ago, and I've also spoken to all of the school board members whether or not they support this or against it, undecided. And 3 of the board members told me that they favor it. They think it is important for school security. That was Tina Deskovich, Andy Ziegler, and Matt Susan all said that they do think it adds a necessary layer of school security. Misty Belford and John Craig haven't really said how they felt about it yet, but keep in mind you would only need a 3-2 vote to pass it.
Which leads me to my next question, and I've written about this in my column. If you have a majority of the board who already said we support this, why not just vote on the issue? We have 2 more town hall meetings that are going to happen before they take the final vote, but is there a perception that maybe they're just going through the motions knowing that they will eventually approve this, and why not just go ahead and vote for it?
It is a concern I've heard from the community at the the first public town hall at Bayside High, I think. A lot of people who attended shouted that out, like, you've already made up your mind. School Board Vice Chair Tina Deskovich says that she is still weighing whether or not it's a good idea. A lot of school board members said they still have a lot of questions about insurance costs and liability. Even though the money from the state would completely cover this Marshall program, unlike school resource officers, which the school district is scrambling to find any money for, there would still be insurance costs. And a lot of parents have brought up, if there's a gun accident, if there's a misfire, if an active shooter situation happens and you shoot the wrong person, who is liable? And the sheriff's office and the school district are still kind of working out those contracts. But Tina said that, depending on the answers to those questions, she said she hasn't decided which way she will vote, although she has in the past said that she likes the idea of a Marshall program.
So, so right now we don't know who would be liable in case of an accident or
the last contract I read made it seem like a marshal is a school district employee, and therefore the school district is liable for what they do. But keep in mind, those contracts are still in the works. Nothing has been finalized. It's my understanding that the school board has been having closed-door security meetings, which they're allowed to do, to kind of work out the kinks in these contracts, and they should be making a final decision by May 8th.
And anything on the insurance front, whether the school district might end up paying more for liability insurance?
From what I've heard from some of the school board members, I remember Andy Ziegler mentioned at the town hall the other day that it is going to be quite costly. We had a town hall here at Florida Today, and a lot of things have been thrown out, and we want to make sure it's only true. Some people were saying you won't even be able to get insurance. It's something that I've been digging into, as we speak, and it's something that the school board is still digging into. But they do, anticipate it being quite expensive to have coverage for this.
So let's hear, I think there are different arguments for the school guardian program. One is you don't want staff and students and teachers to be sitting ducks. Mm-hmm. And let's clarify that classroom teachers would not be eligible for this, right? Because of their contracts that are negotiated by the union. So that's one of the arguments that we have heard, that they have the right to self-defense. The other argument that we've heard from the sheriff is more of a dollars and cents argument, that because you need to have either an SRO or a marshal at each campus, hiring more, I think 51 new SROs would be too expensive, and there's not enough money for that.
Right.
Explain sort of the reasoning behind that, and is the school district still looking at having an SRO at each campus regardless of whether it implements?
Yeah, the school board has said that that is still their ultimate goal. Whether it takes a year, 2 years, 10 years, they want an SRO on every single campus. Like you said, we have about 88 schools in Brevard. They need 51 more SROs. The school district has said they do not have enough money to do that. They're dealing with I think it was like a $4 million deficit. But then also the sheriff's office and the local police departments have said that even if you had all the money in the world, we don't have the officers. As a lot of people know, Brevard County and a lot of other counties in Florida are dealing with a shortage of law enforcement officers, having that trouble recruiting. A lot of police departments have said that even if you had the money, it's still going to take us a year or two to recruit the officers we would need, because they don't want to put fresh officers as SROs, they want veterans. But the school district has been looking into what are their options. They've looked at, can they raise taxes? Implement a new millage rate? Can they do another sales tax? Can they take on debt? Just the other day I was at a meeting where they were looking at what can be eliminated possibly. Is it teaching positions? They even were looking at one of the new projects that should be starting this school year, is a new corridor busing program. They're bringing that back, and while nothing has been decided, they just ask the question, how far along is this? Because that's a couple $1 million. They don't seem to be fans of any of these options. Obviously, taxpayers would not be huge fans of paying more taxes or having another sales tax. We already have one for the Lagoon and one for BPS. But they are currently looking at all their options. They've even thought about going into their reserves, which some might argue is not the best financial practice. It's not recurring money. Once it's gone, it's gone. And if an emergency happens, like a hurricane, you don't have that money.
So, and how much money did the legislature give Brevard for new SROs?
The legislature gave this year about, I think it was $2.5 million for SROs, but I think the school district estimated that they would need closer to $7 million total, winding up in that, these are all round numbers, but like a $4 million deficit. So the way the law is set up, which this was passed by state lawmakers, as you said, you can either have an SRO or you can have an armed marshal. So, some people have said the school board is kind of backed into a corner of, this is your choice. We didn't give you enough money to have an SRO on every campus. A lot of other school districts are facing the exact same thing, but the state provided enough money for the Marshall program, which is a lot cheaper. The training is through the Brevard County Sheriff's Office. These people are volunteers. They're not paid by the school district or anything. So,
And when are they supposed to have everything in place?
Technically, the deadline, I believe, is August 1st. A lot of school districts have already said we're not going to be able to comply with that. I've heard the school board here say, you know, they want to comply with the law, but they also want to do what is best for the kids. And you know, even if they don't have an SRO in place by August 1st at every school, they're still going to continue to work towards it. But they have said that time is ticking on this Marshall program. Just a few weeks ago, Sheriff Ivey kind of did a 180. He said he still believes the Marshall program is very important to school security, and he wholeheartedly believes in it, but he recommended that the school board actually hold off on implementing the program because he was concerned there's not enough time to train the marshals, which they haven't, you know, even selected yet or found out, you know, who would be at each school. And he was concerned that it was overshadowing the conversation about SROs, which he thinks is more important. Dr. Blackburn, the superintendent, has also recommended let's hold off on this Marshall thing. But it doesn't really seem like the school board is interested in holding off. They'll either vote yes or no on May 8th, but it doesn't sound like the decision is just going to be to table it for now.
And what is their reasoning for not listening to the recommendations from the sheriff and the superintendent?
Well, the school board vice chair, Tina Deskovich, said that if they hold off, she's very concerned that there will be schools that are still vulnerable. Because they don't have the money for the SROs, you know, maybe they can add a couple more with the money they do have, or the municipalities that can help them out. But she's fearful that, you know, there might be still a couple dozen schools that don't have a full-time SRO. And so her thinking, as she explained to me, was that having the marshals, it prevents having a 2 or 3 year wait where no one is at the campus. The school district is looking at a couple options. You know, can they have an SRO that visits a couple different schools in one day? The law is pretty clear; it's supposed to be a full-time SRO. But again, that law doesn't really have any.
And it seems that other districts are not even considering complying with the law, or they are expecting that there's a possibility they won't. Is Brevard the only school board that is actively considering this Marshall program that you know of?
The only other one that comes to mind right now is Lake County. There are a couple of other smaller, more rural counties. I'm thinking maybe Escambia as well. But Lake County actually is considering it as well. But out of the 12 largest school districts in Florida, Orange, Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, even Brevard County, where the shooting unfolded, their school boards have already given a hard no, we are not doing this. And it's not because they have all the money in the world for SROs. The new law that says pick one, it doesn't necessarily say what the punishment is if you don't. And some superintendents are requesting that the lawmakers go back to a special session, find more money so that they can do the SRO option.
And they also want to move some of the money that is that is already dedicated for school marshals to move to the SRO pot so that they can hire more SROs, right?
Yeah, this new law, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Public High School Safety Act, it provided a couple pots of money. Money for mental health, money for security upgrades at buildings, and then the two main pots we're talking about are SROs and the Marshall program. Well, at this point, you only have maybe 2 or 3 school districts that want to do this Marshall program. I think it was $67 million total for it, maybe 97, double check. But if not all the school districts opt to do it, what happens to all that money? There's been a couple of different theories. Remember at the town hall, Representative Randy Fine suggested that the extra money be given to the school districts that do the Marshall program to reward them for doing it, while Senator Debbie Mayfield said that it should go to schools who want to do the SRO option instead.
Yeah, so it's $97 million statewide for SROs and $67 million for school marshals, and every district in the state says the $97 million is definitely not enough to cover everything.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, think about it. There's 67 school districts in Florida, and it's $97 million. Education is expensive. It's really expensive. $97 million, that sounds like a lot of money to you and me. But when you're talking about, Brevard County alone has 73,000 students. It has 9,000 teachers, and that's not even the largest county in Florida.
And SROs are expensive. People don't take into account that they also need equipment and benefits and many things on top of their salary. And Sheriff Ivey estimates that the cost per SRO is $130,000 per year,
and
or at least up front. Yes.
And that includes the car, equipment, badge, taser, everything that goes with it.
And so let's talk about how the sheriff has taken the lead from the beginning. He proposed his STOMP program even before the legislature approved it.
Right.
Is he seen as the force behind the school board, actually considering the program?
From what I've seen, I would say so. It's kind of thrown an interesting wrench in things by him doing that. I'll call it a 180. Now he's recommending to hold off. I think that caught some residents by surprise. But at all these town halls, at the school board meetings, they're playing his 11-minute video that explains the program. Multiple times the school board has referred to him as their security expert. His sheriff's office runs school security for the district. But what's interesting is the school board members who have said they support it are also being very closely tied to the program. When I was at the first town hall, there was also a die-in protest beforehand. It was a group of about a dozen students, who were holding gravestones and saying, RIP, gun left in bathroom and I got shot, to protest the Marshall program. And I was speaking to one of them, and one of them actually referred to Tina as the face of the program. And I found that very interesting because I wouldn't have necessarily thought that, but the board members who have chosen sides are very quickly being identified as
she was from the beginning probably the largest supporter
yeah.
on the board.
And she's recognized that too, that she's been a pretty vocal supporter. I've attended a couple other community meetings where she's presented the plan, and she says she does value it as an added layer of security for schools.
And you and I attended the last board meeting in which dozens of people spoke overwhelmingly against the program. Just this week we had the first town hall. Did we hear the same rhetoric from people who showed up as previous meetings?
I will say that the first town hall, it was much more split. I think that you're right. So far we've heard only from really the group that totally opposes this. Moms Demand Action, the Progressive Alliance, Speak Out Brevard, different student groups have really organized to come out and speak against
this. Those are
this.
more progressive groups, like you said.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that the other side that maybe supports this program has realized if they want it to be implemented, they also need to make their voices heard. I like to quote Dr. Blackburn that he says when people are angry, they show up, and when they're happy, they stay home. But they've learned that you need to come out and show that you support it if you support it. And yeah, the recent town hall, it was very split, I would say. It was very even with who wanted the program, who didn't. I attended a Ronald Reagan Club meeting on Monday, and I mean, it was a small meeting, maybe about 20 people or so, but they were all for it. And they brought up concerns that they actually thought it was too much training, which was something I had never heard before. So I know that we're hearing a lot from the people who are against it, but in my personal opinion, I think the community is very split.
And Florida Today did a very unscientific poll, but what were the results of that?
In our very unscientific poll that basically just asks you if you support the plan or not, it was pretty overwhelming. Off the top of my head, wasn't it like 70% of people said they were against it? Keep in mind the school district is currently surveying people. They already did one survey asking people, would you be willing to volunteer? I think this was non-teachers. They found about 267 other staffers who said they would be interested.
And that's just 40% of Brevard Public School staff, right?
Well, it's 267. 700 people took the poll, 267 people said they'd be willing, but there's 4,500 non-teaching staff. So I think is a lot lower. We're still trying to get in touch with some of those people, by the way, if you're interested. The school district is also currently polling parents, teachers, other staff, community members, just whether or not they support the program. The data from those surveys hasn't been made available yet, but we'll definitely be sharing it on floridatoday.com when we get it.
And so what else did this survey that we already have the results for show? One of the questions was if you have a military background, and just short of 10% said that they do, and that was the expectation that employees who were in the military or are retired law enforcement would be the ones to volunteer for this, but it seems that the overwhelming majority of those don't have that background, right?
Right, yeah. Sheriff Ivey said that he envisions, like the top candidate for this Marshall program would be someone with former law enforcement, former military experience. But yeah, like I said, 267 people said they'd be willing. but of the 700 people who responded to the survey, yeah, I think it was only 9 or 10% said that they had that background. They also asked how many people had a concealed carry permit. That number was a bit higher, but again, it wasn't an overwhelming number. So that's one part of the program that, it feels like we've been talking about this forever, but we're not really that far along at all. Until the school board decides what they want to do, even if there's 267 people who say they would volunteer for it, are they going to be evenly dispersed among schools? Yeah. Brevard is a long county.
Could someone who volunteers be transferred to a different school? To me, it doesn't seem like that would be the case, that they would end up at a different school.
Sheriff Ivey said that they wouldn't want this to disrupt the educational environment. I've asked him, would you transfer people? Would you rearrange the building so that if you have two marshals who happen to have their classrooms right next to each other, do you want this guy on the other side of the campus? And he said, no, they're not really interested in doing that because they don't want to interrupt what kids are there for, which is school.
And so we've heard so much from opponents of the plan, people who showed up at this town hall meeting and who supported. What are they saying?
Well, the thing I'm hearing a lot is that, if an active shooter situation happens, the kind of phrase is that you're the first line of defense, that even though we have got pretty good response times here in Brevard for police, it's still going to be a couple minutes for them to get to a campus, and that if staffers are armed, they can be the first line of defense. A lot of people, especially since the county commission approved letting county employees bring guns to work if they have concealed carry, a lot of people have just said that it's a right. They think it's a right that you should be able to defend yourself no matter where you are, and that's definitely something that Sheriff Ivey has been pushing in the community. I think he'll tell you himself that he believes that citizens should be armed and that they should defend themselves. That's the main thing that I've heard from parents. But parents on the other side are very, very fearful of gun accidents. We've seen a couple things in the news recently, a gun left in a bathroom, a gun goes off while it's in a holster, if a student gets a hold of a gun. So that's the main fear I hear on the other side. And a lot of parents have already said, I'm pulling my kid out if this goes through. I'm looking at private school, I'm looking at homeschool. I've heard from teachers who are considering quitting if this goes through.
And so we had our town hall here at Florida today, and a couple of parents of minority students got up and expressed a lot of concern. What are the concerns among minorities in the county?
Right, and we did a whole big Sunday piece about it too, talking to some of those communities. Obviously, there's been a lot of headlines over the years about unarmed black men being killed by police officers. There's lots of different cases out there, lots of different details that go into them, but I think that same fear applies here to some minority families. They're fearful that, are the marshals, are the guns going to be used for intimidation? If an emergency does happen at the school, is a teacher who has racism, a staffer who has racism inside them, if they see a kid wearing a hoodie who maybe has darker skin, are they going to think that's the shooter because they have that racism inside them? The training through Ivey's STOMP program does include 12 hours of diversity training as required by state law, but we heard from a couple students and parents who said 12 hours of diversity training isn't going to erase your inherent bias.
And what does that diversity training even entail? Do we know?
We really don't know. The law states that it has to be through a nationally recognized program. We've been trying to find out more. I think the last thing Sheriff Ivey told me was that it would most likely be through Eastern Florida State College's Public Safety Institute. They have a whole institute over there training police officers and such. But that's another thing that we're going to be looking into is what is this diversity training? What is the 12 hours?
And one of the things that has been raised a lot is what happens during an active shooter situation. Could the marshal be misidentified as the shooter when law enforcement comes in? And what has the sheriff said about that?
He's been very vague about it, and the argument he's given there is that they don't want to give everything away. A lot of things in school districts are public information, but security is one of those things that isn't. He has only said that the marshals will be identifiable in some way, that first responders and principals at the school will know who they are so that won't happen. But the rebuttal I've heard to that is, when an active shooter situation occurs, like do they throw a vest on? Do they throw like a badge on? Is it a quick little hand signal you do? We don't know, and we don't know how. And
could they become targets, you know, for the actual shooter?
Right, it's a valid question. You know, if you have to be identifiable, you know, obviously Brevard is in the spotlight now. You know, is the active shooter going to know, I need to be looking for marshals? Ivy has described the marshal program not just as something that reacts when there is an active shooter, but he has also described it as hopefully a deterrent. He feels, and a lot of other people in Brevard County feel, that if people know this place is armed, if people know this place is heavily guarded, bad guys won't come in. You know, we keep hearing the quote, only a good guy with a gun can stop a bad guy with a gun. There's not a ton of research to that point, but that seems to be Ivy's belief, that if people know there's people in this school who are armed, the bad guys won't even try to come in.
And we have only a minute and a half left, but let's talk about the other 4 layers of Sheriff Ivy's plan, which do not include arming staffers. What are those other 4 layers or 3 layers?
So the first one is education and awareness. So that's doing more regular active shooter drills, lockdown practices. A lot of schools in Brevard do those, but what they kind of found after Parkland was that it was kind of sporadic. It wasn't really uniform. Schools were kind of all doing their own thing. So it's that. There's also an anonymous tip line that is being heavily promoted, that we've already seen being used. We've been reporting a lot about hoax threats, but it's good, you know, calling into that line if you see suspicious activity. That also includes this new program. It started at the beginning of the school year before Parkland at the alternative learning centers. That's where kids who've been suspended or have behavior issues go, hopefully, so that they can graduate, they don't drop out, they don't get taken out of school. The next layer is, well, one of the layers is school resource officers. That's the layer that basically everyone can agree on these other layers. So that's putting school resource officers in schools. And the other layer is hardening school facilities, which Brevard Public Schools has already been doing through the half-cent sales tax, the 6-foot fences, security cameras, but they want to do more of that. Residents have brought up metal detectors, things like that.
Caroline, thank you so much for being here. Make sure you follow her coverage at floridatoday.com. This is it for our show. Make sure to watch us again on WEFS and on floridatoday.com. Thanks.